First debuting in 1962 from the minds of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, Spider-Man almost instantly became Marvel Comics' most popular and successful superhero, a mantle he still proudly holds 60 years later. In this video, to celebrate his 60th birthday and the release of Spider-Man No Way Home, we'll trace the inception and creation of Old Webhead and look at his appearances in extended film and television media over the course of 6 decades, strongly focusing on his many cartoon appearances as one of the most adapted superheroes in the medium, in this special edition of Cartoon Evolution. Following the debut of DC Comics' Superman in 1938, larger-than-life, all-powerful superhuman heroes absolutely flourished. The publisher quickly introduced new characters, such as Batman, The Flash, and Wonder Woman, kickstarting the so-called Golden Age of comic books. Hot on their heels was another upcoming label, Timely Comics, founded by pulp magazine publisher Martin Goodman, who swiftly introduced such characters as the Human Torch, the Submariner, and the Star-Spangled Man himself, Captain America. Superhero comics became a great source of disposable, escapist entertainment during wartime, though by 1950 they had rapidly fallen out of fashion and become scapegoats in the media for a rising juvenile delinquency. Timely decommissioned their publications and changed their name to Atlas Magazines, once again solely specializing in the pulp stories that inspired superheroes to begin with. By 1954, the Comics Code Authority was implemented to help publishers self-regulate violence in comics. The problem was, the superhero comics that remained had become tiresome and formulaic, and readers had either outgrown them or were now simply disinterested. In 1956, DC revitalized the superhero genre with a modern reboot of The Flash, kickstarting the Silver Age of comic books, with team-up comic Justice League of America introduced in 1960, becoming their best-selling title. With that, Goodman decided his company, now named Marvel, needed to get back into the superhero game, with a brand new title focused on a super team. Comics editor Stan Lee and artist Jack Kirby were put to the task, creating the Fantastic Four in 1961. Lee described the new characters as ones audiences could personally relate to, flesh and blood with faults and foibles, who were fallible and feisty. Comics were revolutionized once again as readers flocked to a new breed of superhero, ones that were not just super, but utterly human, with modern and realistic stories. Former Marvel editor-in-chief Roy Thomas called the Fantastic Four a revolution, and their debut one of the most influential single issues in history. With incredibly strong sales and audience feedback, Goodman tasked Lee with creating more heroes from the same mold, debuting the Incredible Hulk, Thor, and Ant-Man soon after. At the same time, Lee happened across an ingenious idea that would prove even more popular than the lot of them. It's an origin story as mythical as the characters, and one that Lee, who told it countless times, even debates the validity of. Regardless, he is the only one worthy enough to tell the tale.
When you do a superhero strip, the first thing you have to think of is what superpower will he have? I was watching a fly walking on a wall, and I said, gee, wouldn't it be cool if I had a hero who could stick to walls like an insect? What'll I call him? Insect Man? That didn't sound dramatic. Mosquito Man? Yeah, I went down the list. When I got to Spider-Man, Spider-Man. Oh, that sounded dramatic.
Lee would also note pulp magazine hero The Spider as being of some influence, having enjoyed his comics and film serial when he was younger. However, when Lee pitched Spider-Man to Goodman, he allegedly responded, "People don't like spiders," additionally taking issue to Lee's plan to make the character a youth, saying teenagers can only be sidekicks, not heroes. In fact, part of the reason Lee wanted to name the character Spider-Man and not Spider-Boy was to make him sound superior. A hyphen was added to avoid confusion with the similarly spelled Superman. Though Goodman wasn't sold on the idea, he allowed Lee to test it in an issue of Amazing Adult Fantasy, a Twilight Zone-inspired anthology comic which was dying thanks to poor sales. However, to help sell the teen-aimed story, the adult was dropped from the title. Lee chose Kirby to illustrate the comic, but soon found his take wasn't what he'd hoped. While Lee envisioned an awkward, unheroic teen, Thomas described Kirby's take as full of his trademark dynamism and heroism, while fellow Marvel artist Steve Ditko called it very simple and unspiderly. It was in fact Ditko who Lee ultimately hired, with his characteristic quirkiness lending itself perfectly to the slightly comedic character. Ironically, Goodman rejected Ditko's cover for the issue, choosing Kirby to ink it instead. Ditko's Spider-Man was dynamic without being over the top or macho, and critics have lauded his brilliance in giving him a full-face cobweb design mask, making Spider-Man one of few heroes at the time whose identity was a secret. In Lee's words, Spider-Man could be anybody behind that mask. Ditko's design was so perfect in fact, it's remained largely unchanged for 60 years. Amazing Fantasy number 15 hit shelves in August of 1962, telling the tale of Peter Parker, a gawky young teen who's bitten by a radioactive spider, giving him spider-like powers including proportionate strength, super senses, and the ability to crawl on walls. He additionally builds a device that allows him to shoot webs. Initially planning to exploit his powers for monetary gain, when he inadvertently plays a role in the death of his uncle, he turns to life as a vigilante hero, learning with great power there must also come great responsibility. Soon after publication, Goodman decided to cancel Amazing Fantasy, making Spidey's debut its finale. However, when sales figures rolled in, it proved to be one of Marvel's highest ever selling issues at the time. The juxtaposition between the hero's two identities instantly drew in readers. Thomas attributes the fact that Lee and Kirby made the story humorous, heroic, ironic, tragic, and even pathetic, just like real life, to its enormous success. This was of course Lee's plan all along.
I tried to keep it realistic. In order not to make him a typical hero, I made him an average guy who was kind of unpopular. He was sort of a nerd. The kids didn't like him. They thought he was a bookworm. He didn't have enough money. He had to support his old aunt. He was an orphan. He was shy and so forth. And it turned out he was somebody that the readers could relate to.
Spider-Man's adventures were set to continue, and in mere months was headlining his own comic, with Amazing Spider-Man debuting in March 1963. Within only 3 years, it became Marvel's second highest selling comic behind Fantastic Four, and soon enough became the highest selling, with Spidey becoming the single most popular hero in the publisher's roster. Over the next few years, love interests like Gwen Stacey, Mary Jane Watson, and Betty Brant debuted, further adding to the human element of the story, and a rogues gallery of villains, one of comic history's most iconic, began to form around him. When other heroes spawned in Marvel's pages, and various characters teamed up to form the Avengers, Spidey became part of a larger expanded universe, all rooted within a hyper-realistic New York City. Over the following decades, various Spidey spin-offs or side series spawned, furthering the tales of Peter Parker. Additionally, in the late 1970s, Marvel introduced Jessica Drew, the Spider-Woman, and in 2011, African-American Puerto Rican teen Miles Morales took up the mantle of Spider-Man in the Ultimate Marvel Universe. Various other Alt-Universe Spideys were introduced in 2014's iconic Spider-Verse story arc. Spider-Man's most expansive extended universe material, however, is easily his appearances in external media, having appeared in dozens of official TV series and movies. His first on-screen appearance was in animated series Spider-Man, which debuted on the ABC network in 1967 and starred Paul Soles, the first person to play the character. Produced in an incredibly limited animation style, utilizing minimal movement, low detail and recycled animation, the first season was produced by Grantley Lawrence Animation and enlisted Stan Lee as a story consultant, keeping stories and villains faithful to the comics. However, with Grantley Lawrence going out of business, Ralph Bakshi at Krantz Films took over production duties on seasons 2 and 3. For these seasons, budget was slashed even further, resulting in even more limitation in the animation and the elimination of comic supervillains in favour of generic monsters. Budgets were so low for later episodes that some entirely reused animation from another of the studio series, Rocket Robin Hood, with the title character replaced with Spider-Man. Regardless of the show's quality, it was a reasonable success, running until 1970 for 52 episodes, and leaving a mark on the pop culture zeitgeist by introducing this classic theme:
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.
And this much memed moment.
That man's an imposter! That man is the imposter!
In 1974, Spidey swung onto television screens in live action on PBS's educational sketch comedy children's series, The Electric Company. In a recurring segment called Spidey Super Stories, he was seen fighting absurd villains and assisting in ludicrous situations. He was portrayed by puppeteer and dancer Danny Seagren, though was never unmasked and didn't speak aloud. Instead, Spidey was given speech bubbles, an attempt to help children with literacy skills. Marvel provided the character for free due to its educational non-profit nature. Not only was this Spidey's first live-action appearance, but it was the first live-action interpretation of a Marvel character since 1944's Captain America film serial. In the late 70s, Spidey crawled into his very own primetime live-action action-adventure series, The Amazing Spider-Man, on CBS. Kicking off with a feature-length pilot in 1977, simply titled Spider-Man, the series officially debuted in 1978. Starring Nicholas Hammond, the series saw Peter Parker's struggles with his dual identity, and featured Spidey going up against generic villains, mostly ground-level criminals and international terrorists. While it performed well, the series was cancelled in mid-1979 after only 13 episodes. CBS had difficulty making the series appeal to older viewers, with Stan Lee calling it too juvenile, and faced criticism from Spidey fans who bemoaned the lack of comic-inspired storylines and characters. CBS were also scared of becoming the superhero network, having additionally produced numerous other comic-based series and specials. In international territories, the pilot movie was released theatrically, as were two additional sequels, Spider-Man Strikes Back and Spider-Man The Dragon's Challenge, which combined multi-episode arcs into feature films. In 1978, a second live-action series debuted, this time in Japan. Spider-Man, commonly known as Japanese Spider-Man, was produced by Toei Company under a 4-year licensing deal with Marvel. Under Toei, Spider-Man was totally re-envisioned as Takuya Yamashiro, a young motorcycle racer who inherits spider powers after being injected with the blood of an alien from Planet Spider. He's given a special bracelet that activates a spider protector costume, gives him the ability to shoot web lines, and allows him to control a spaceship called the Marveler, which can transform into a giant robot named Leopardon to help him battle an alien army. Inspired by Japan's mecha and Sentai crazes, the only real connection to the comics were in name, costume, and powers only. Regardless, the series was very successful, with 41 episodes airing on Tokyo TV and sporting a mid-series spin-off film in 1978. It's commonly believed that the series directly led to the inception of the Transformers and the Power Rangers. While huge in Japan, the series never released internationally officially until 2009, despite Stan Lee having been a big fan. Though her comic series was relatively short-lived, 1979 saw the debut of a similarly short-lived Spider-Woman animated series. It was designed as a spin-off of the 1967 Spider-Man animated series and even guest-starred Paul Soles as Peter Parker in 2 of its 16 episodes. While produced in a similar limited animation style, the series, produced by DePatie Freeling Enterprises, had a marginally higher budget and featured improved animation. The series came to an end in 1980. In 1981, when DePatie Freeling's co-owner, Friz Freeling, returned to Warner Bros. Cartoons, the studio was sold to Marvel and rechristened Marvel Productions, becoming one of the major players in the animation industry through the 1980s. In launching the studio and in attempt to attract network interest, a brand new Spider-Man cartoon was produced, a follow-up to the original 1967 series, but utilising the animation style of Spider-Woman. The series returned the character to comic-inspired stories and featured Spidey's classic villains. Running in syndication between 1981 and 1982 for 26 episodes, just as hoped, it quickly caught the attention of the networks, with NBC quickly scooping up the rights to air a Spidey series of their own. In turn, spin-off series Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was put into production concurrently and saw Spidey teaming up with X-Men heroes Iceman and Firestar to form the Spidey Friends, temporarily adding other iconic Marvel characters to the roster over the course of the series. The series was an obvious attempt to combat ABC's wildly popular Super Friends series, which featured a team-up of classic DC characters. Amazing Friends was likewise successful, running for 24 episodes over 3 seasons until 1983. It was renamed The Incredible Hulk and The Amazing Spider-Man in its second season, and then The Amazing Spider-Man and The Incredible Hulk in its third, pairing new episodes with episodes of The Incredible Hulk in an hour-long block. Both Spidey series were later rerun alongside other Marvel series between 1988 and 1991 in the 90-minute Marvel Action Universe block. Around this time, film studios began vying for the opportunity to create a live-action Spider-Man movie. Legendary horror producer Roger Corman briefly optioned the rights in 1985, developing a Cold War-inspired take on the property, though following disputes with Stan Lee, low-budget exploitation studio Cannon Films acquired the rights later that year. Cannon's original Spidey concept was a body horror monster flick, featuring Parker turned into an 8-legged mutant by a mad scientist, set to be directed by Texas Chainsaw Massacre director Tobe Hooper. Stan Lee was allegedly outraged with this idea and forced them to rework the film based on a spec by himself. Cannon was given $20 million in funding, drew up storyboards, produced concept art, and released various marketing materials, including a spec trailer. However, the budget was slashed to $7 million after disastrous performance of Cannon's Superman 4: The Quest for Peace and Masters of the Universe. Upcoming actor Tom Cruise was considered for the title role, as was Scott Lever, an actor regularly hired to portray the character at Marvel events. When Cannon fell into financial trouble in 1992, the project was picked up by the Terminator director James Cameron and reworked as a dark adult fantasy. It too ultimately fell apart, Cameron recently calling it the greatest film I never made. Eventually, copyright disputes led to a potential Spidey film falling into limbo. Spidey couldn't keep away from the small screen, however, with Marvel launching a new animated series on Fox Kids in 1994, again simply titled Spider-Man, to help launch their brand new production arm, Marvel Films Animation. The new series took enormous inspiration from the comics, focusing on both Parker's personal life as a school student and his exploits as Spider-Man, with multi-layered dramatic storylines ripped directly from the comics, and saw the hero going up against his iconic Rogues Gallery. Most notably, it marked the first on-screen depiction of fan-favourite Venom, who debuted in the comics in 1984. The series, rooted within the Marvel Universe, also featured cameos from various other heroes, occasionally crossing over with two concurrent Marvel series, X-Men and Iron Man. Spidey even cameoed in an episode of X-Men produced by Saban. Spider-Man utilised a relatively smooth animation style that was occasionally limited, utilising traditional cell-based animation with some CGI elements and backgrounds. The series was incredibly popular with critics and audiences, garnering incredibly high ratings and becoming the most popular children's program in America. Running for 65 episodes across 5 seasons until 1998, it was also the longest running Spidey adaptation at the time, and many still consider it the best and most faithful. Following in 1999 was Spider-Man Unlimited, considered a loosely connected sequel series. With Sony Pictures having recently won live-action film rights, Saban were restricted from using much source material. As such, Unlimited presented a cyberpunk alt-universe take, which saw Parker stuck on a futuristic Counter-Earth with Venom and Carnage, another relatively new Spidey villain at the time. Also barred from using the classic Spidey suit outside of the pilot episode, Parker enlisted the help of the Fantastic Four's Reed Richards to develop a new black, red, and blue nanotech suit with a tattered yellow cape, inbuilt web shooters, stealth tech, and anti-symbiote sonic weaponry. While this was a unique take, it was clearly an attempt to capitalize on the success of DC's futuristic Batman Beyond, and drew some inspiration from Spider-Man 2099, who debuted in comics in 1992. Unlimited received lukewarm reception, lost in the ratings to Pokemon and Digimon, and was dropped after only a few airings. The remaining episodes were aired between 2000 and 2001 before the show was completely cancelled after only 13 episodes. In 2002, Spidey's long gestating return to live action finally hit cinemas with the release of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, starring Tobey Maguire. The film told an authentic origin story, which saw Parker as a high school student learning the ropes of life, while fawning over Mary Jane Watson and dealing with his newly inherited powers, putting them to the test against the Green Goblin. It used a mixture of practical effects and state-of-the-art CGI. Using his trademark bombastic and boisterous style, Raimi brought a true comic book feel. Staying true to Spidey's comic book roots, the character was depicted in his classic costume, though in an ultra-modern, high-budget, form-fitting suit, which included raised metallic webbing and triangular mirrored lenses in the mask. One deviation from the comics saw Parker able to shoot organic webs directly from his wrist. Opening in early 2002, it was a critical and commercial hit, smashing at least a dozen box office records. It also became the highest grossing superhero movie and went on to be the year's highest earner in the US and the 9th highest ever grossing movie globally, taking in over $820 million on a $140 million budget. 2003 saw the release of Spider-Man the New Animated Series, a follow-up to the movie set within the same continuity, though loosely based on the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, a modern reimagining. The series featured computer animation with traditional cell shading, making it the first fully CG Spidey series. It starred Neil Patrick Harris as Spidey and featured Michael Clark Duncan as Kingpin, reprising his role from the ill-fated 2003 Daredevil. Produced by Sony Pictures Television, the series aired on MTV, a decision which was ridiculed at the time, leading to the tongue-in-cheek moniker MTV Spider-Man. Regardless, the show was reasonably well received, though did poorly in the ratings, leading to an untimely cancellation after only 13 episodes. Ultimately, however, the series was rendered non-canon with the release of 2 film sequels. Spider-Man 2 released in 2004, which saw Parker dealing with the emotional ramifications of being a hero and briefly relinquishing his powers before returning to battle the evil Doc Ock. Spidey was seen in the same suit, though with bolder colours and a slightly altered chest emblem. Though it didn't perform as well as the first at the box office, it still managed to pull in just under $800 million on a $200 million budget. Despite this, critics and audiences praised the film for its darker nature, mature storyline, and superb performances, and is now commonly considered one of the greatest superhero movies ever made. A third film, Spider-Man 3, followed in 2007, seeing Spider Spidey tackling a whole roster of villains, including Venom, Sandman, and the new Green Goblin. Spidey's suit was again much the same, though turned black after merging with the symbiote Venom. With an estimated budget of up to $350 million, it was the most expensive movie ever made at the time, and pulled in almost $900 million at the global box office. Regardless, the film didn't fare as well with critics and audiences, who found it to be too long, overloaded, narratively bloated, and slightly wacky. Though a fourth movie was announced and deep into pre-production, it was cancelled due to creative differences between Raimi and Sony. In the meantime, Sony Pictures Television produced yet another Spidey cartoon series, debuting The Spectacular Spider-Man in 2008. This series took tonal inspiration from the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, featuring a contemporary setting and characters, however took narrative inspiration from the early Amazing Spider-Man comics, adapting many of their storylines. Additionally, some elements were carried over from the Raimi trilogy. Produced in a gorgeous modern animation style, the series was an enormous hit with fans and critics. However, it saw a premature cancellation when Marvel was purchased by Disney midway through its run, meaning Sony could no longer use Spidey on TV. Running on the CW for one season and Disney XD for a second, it came to an end in 2009 after 26 episodes. In 2012, however, Sony released yet another live-action Spidey film, rebooting the franchise completely as The Amazing Spider-Man, directed by Mark Webb. Starring Andrew Garfield, the film took a more modern approach, inspired by Ultimate Spider-Man, and put a darker, more serious take on Spidey's origin. Webb reinvented Spider-Man, creating a costume that was longer, spindlier, and more agile, wanting to give him a spider-like illusion. Additionally, the suit employed artificial web shooters, darker webbing, a mesh-like texture, and smaller yellow lenses. Here, Spidey went up against the villainous Lizard, and the film instead used Gwen Stacey as Parker's love interest. The movie was reasonably well received, though some took issue with the gloomier tone and rehashing of an origin story that had been told on film only 10 years prior. Grossing just over $750 million at the global box office on a $230 million budget, it became the highest grossing reboot of all time. It fared well enough to spawn a sequel, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which released in 2014. Here, the Spidey suit remained largely the same, though was much brighter, less textured, and featured larger white lenses. The film also doubled down on the darker tone, making for, perhaps, the most emotionally harrowing Spidey flick yet. However, this was in stark contrast to the film's extremely goofy villains, Electro, the Green Goblin, and Rhino. While the film took in $709 million at the global box office on a $290 million budget, it was poorly received, with viewers lamenting its dark tone, oddball villains, and overstuffed plot. Soon after, Sony planned to launch a Spider-Man film universe to compete with Disney's Marvel Cinematic Universe, which had launched in 2008 and quickly become the most lucrative franchise of all time. Plans included The Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4 and a series of villain-centric spin-offs. Sony even toyed with the idea of returning Raimi to produce a new Maguire-led trilogy or a Spider-Man vs. The Amazing Spider-Man crossover. Though these projects all fell apart, Sony did eventually form their own universe of Marvel characters, which currently consists of 2018's Venom, its 2021 sequel Venom Let There Be Carnage, and the upcoming Morbius in 2022 and Kraven the Hunter in 2023. With Disney exercising their rights to animation, they launched Ultimate Spider-Man in 2012. The series put a fresh spin on his origin, seeing him recruited by Nick Fury to, with the aid of S.H.I.E.L.D. tech, become the most ultimate version of Spider-Man possible, and the leader of a teen hero team. In later seasons, it was subtitled Ultimate Spider-Man Web Warriors and Ultimate Spider-Man vs. the Sinister Six. Making use of a modern angular art style, the series was infused with rapid-fire gags, fourth-wall breaks, and juvenile humour, with many taking issue to its Family Guy-like style. Regardless, it performed well enough to last 104 episodes across 4 seasons, becoming the longest-running Spidey series yet. Additionally, Ultimate Spider-Man was part of Disney XD's Marvel Universe block, somewhat of an animated MCU, which utilised similar character depictions as the live-action films and featured interconnected series. As such, Spidey crossed over into various series between 2012 and 2019, including The Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, its follow-up, Avengers Assemble, Hulk and the Agents of Smash, and the Phineas and Ferb Mission Marvel Special, the first animated crossover between Marvel and Disney properties. With Ultimate Spider-Man ending in 2017, it was immediately replaced with Marvel's Spider-Man, designed to capitalise on an upcoming live-action reboot series. This cartoon was a more traditional retelling of Spidey's origins. The series utilised a fresh, yet somewhat more limited animation style. Also part of the Marvel Universe block, the series crossed over with Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Outbreak and, like its predecessor, Avengers Assemble. It ran until 2020 for 58 episodes over 3 seasons, the third of which was subtitled Spider-Man Maximum Venom. Throughout this time, Spidey also appeared in a number of unique adaptations, including a series of 3 LEGO Marvel Superheroes short films, initially debuting as 5-part mini web series and then in full on Disney XD. These were produced in CG animation and depicted the characters as LEGO minifigures, weaving in many elements from the MCU. He also appeared in numerous episodes of 2014 Toei animation series Marvel Disc Wars: The Avengers, a 51-episode anime produced with Walt Disney Japan and designed to tie in with a range of Bandai action figures. A follow-up anime, Marvel Future Avengers, premiered in 2017 and featured Spider-Man in a small handful of its 26 episodes. Additionally, 2017 saw the launch of Disney Junior's Marvel Superhero Adventures, a short-form 40-episode series aimed at preschoolers, featuring Spidey teaching lessons to a group of kids by way of flashbacks to his childhood years fighting crime. Featuring baby-fied Marvel heroes, clearly inspired by their MCU iterations, it aimed to teach children about friendship, cooperation, and heroism. A similar Spidey is currently starring in Disney Junior's CG animated Spidey and His Amazing Friends, which premiered in mid-2021. Not only a follow-up to Superhero Adventures, but a spiritual successor to the classic 1981 Amazing Friends series, it sees Spidey as a youth fighting crime in a super team, teaming up with other Marvel characters along the way. 2018 also saw the release of Spidey's first feature-length animated film, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which focused on Miles Morales, voiced by Shameik Moore, taking up the mantle of Spider-Man after the death of Peter Parker. However, Morales soon finds himself tangled up in a multiversal web, which sees him fighting alongside various other Spider-People from different dimensions, including numerous Peter Parkers. The Parker of his universe, voiced by Chris Pine, a disheveled middle-aged alt-universe Parker, voiced by Jake Johnson, and a 30s universe Spider-Man Noir, voiced by Nicolas Cage. Haley Steinfeld also starred in the role of Stacey, taking the mantle of Spider-Woman. Produced in a gorgeous CG traditional hybrid, it received widespread praise, winning the Best Animated Picture Academy Award. Taking in $375 million on a $90 million budget, 2 sequels were immediately greenlit, the first of which, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, hits theaters in 2022, and will feature even more Spider-People, including Spider-Man 2099. Disney and Sony cut an unprecedented deal in 2015, resulting in a co-share of Spidey's universe, allowing him to finally enter the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Portrayed by Tom Holland, Spidey made his MCU debut in 2016's Captain America: Civil War, where he's recruited by Tony Stark to join his fraction of the Avengers after a dispute splinters the team. Instead of treading over the origins again, the MCU introduced him as a pre-established established street-level hero. In 2017, Spidey spun off into his own solo film, Spider-Man Homecoming, directed by John Watts, which saw him battle classic villain Vulture. The film earned $880 million at the global box office and was lauded by critics and audiences for its bright and lively comic-accurate portrayal, which was equal parts comedic and dramatic. Spidey then appeared in 2018's Avengers Infinity War, where he's fully enlisted into the Avengers to fight Thanos. After being snapped into oblivion, he appeared only briefly in its 2019 follow-up, Avengers Endgame, which pulled in close to $3 billion at the global box office to become the highest grossing film of all time, shattering almost every major box office record in the process. Another solo outing released that very year, Spider-Man Far From Home, which saw him recruited by Fury and Maria Hill to fight Mysterio and the Elementals. Earning over $1 billion at the global box office, it became the highest earning Spidey film of all time, a record which is surely set to be broken by the brand new Spider-Man No Way Home, which hit cinemas in 2021. The film sees all three live-action Spideys teaming up alongside Doctor Strange to take on a roster of villains from the previous series after the multiverse is blown wide open. The film not only widened the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but finally allowed Sony their long-gestating live-action Spider-Verse project, and fans the team-up they never thought possible. In the MCU, Spidey is given an AI-enhanced Stark tech suit with animated eyes, devices that shoot synthetic web wings, a parachute, and drones. In Civil War and Homecoming, he appears in a comic-inspired blue and red tech suit. In Far From Home, he sports a much sleeker, upgraded suit with black and red color scheme and AI upgrades, as well as an all-black shield stealth suit, which he uses under the moniker of Night Monkey. In Avengers Infinity War, he wears the classic gold, red, and blue Iron Spider suit, featuring an all-alloy armor and 4 metal spider legs. In No Way Home, he suits up in an integrated suit, a hybrid between the upgraded tech suit and the Iron Spider armor. Additionally, he is also featured in a black and gold suit with integrated sling ring to control portals like Doctor Strange. Overcoming a 2019 studio dispute that threatened to see Spidey removed from the MCU, our favourite web-slinger is set to live on in the franchise. While No Way Home rounds out the Home trilogy with no future films officially announced, producer Amy Pascal recently revealed that plans for another MCU-set trilogy are underway. Furthermore, following a brief alt-reality appearance as Zombie Hunter Spider-Man in Marvel Studios' What If, an animated series titled Spider-Man Freshman Year is in development for Disney+, giving the studio the chance to tell Spidey's MCU canon origins in cartoon form. With Spidey swinging into different projects left, right, and centre, it's quite clear that everyone's favourite wall crawler has a long and fruitful life ahead of him on the big and small screens, lunging into the future as one of the most iconic and successful fictional characters of all time. Perhaps even more relevant now than he was 60 years ago. And at that, I'm slinging it over to you. I want to know, what is your favourite interpretation of Spider-Man, and who is your favourite Spider-Man actor? Web blast away down in the comments below and let me know your thoughts. Hey everyone, if you haven't yet, smash that big old subscribe button up on your screen to keep up to date with all my content, and hit that like button down below. Also, don't forget to check me out on social media, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon for as little as $1 a month for exclusive videos, early access content, and to get your name up on the screen. Thanks again for watching.